So now that it's been a while since Elio's come out and I've been able to process some of my thoughts on the movie, I want to go and rank all 8 Pixar movies that have come out towards this decade. And just to let you guys know, I will actually be ranking every Pixar movie in tier list form when Toy Story 5 comes out in about a year or so. But right now, we're just doing the 8 Pixar films that have released this decade. So please let me know which Pixar movie of the decade is your favorite right here. Here's a graphic of each of the movies. You can either list your favorite one, turn the comment section into a whole discussion of which ones are your favorite. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And with that out of the way, let's begin off with the ranking. So in last place is Turning Red, a movie that I don't hate. I don't actually hate any Pixar movie, but Turning Red is one that I don't really come back to a whole lot, and it's not really a movie that is for me. Not a bad movie, not a badly directed movie, it's just a film that didn't resonate with me a whole lot when I watched it. I do think the movie is one of Pixar's funniest films, and I do love the movie's animation, but I do think some of the characters can get a bit annoying, and I didn't love the whole conflict of the movie with the 2 red pandas. It's not a terrible movie, no, it's just a film that I don't really plan on ever going back to. Next up is Elemental, another movie I don't think is completely bad, but it is one of Pixar's weaker movies. On paper, I think this movie sounds pretty cool, of this world where everyone's an element of like fire, air, water, and land, but the movie doesn't really do a great job at executing that much. It just feels like a stereotypical Pixar movie of like, oh, what if these elements had feelings, and the whole city and the world building doesn't feel that creative. It kind of feels like Zootopia, but kind of more like a downgrade. Not bad. I do think the animation does look great, but its concept is not one of Pixar's strongest, and its story is certainly not one of the best, which makes Elemental one of their least memorable and probably one of my least favorite Pixar films. Not bad, but there's a lot better things that come out from the studio. Number 6, my gosh, this one disappointed me the most, Lightyear. I've actually seen Lightyear like, 12 times at this point? And when I saw the movie the last time, which I think was on a Redbox, I was like, oh, this movie actually is kind of boring. And then I watched it again on Disney Plus, and I couldn't even get 15 minutes into the movie. And as I've seen the movie multiple times, I've sadly have noticed more of its flaws. The big one here is how this movie has no connection to Buzz Lightyear as a character. And I'm not the only one that said this. Even Tim Allen stated this a few years ago, saying that he wished this movie had a better connection. It felt like just a random space adventure that was original, but then Disney thought, hey, how about you just make it Buzz Lightyear so we can milk the Toy Story franchise more? And I think the concept of the movie that Andy saw that made him want a Buzz Lightyear toy is great, but I've seen people after this movie and I'm like, what toy do you want? No one says Buzz, they say socks, because Buzz's personality in this movie, he's just another example of Disney turning a really great childhood hero into a broken old man like Luke Skywalker or Indiana Jones, and that's the same thing they do with Buzz Lightyear. The movie's also not very creative at all, unfortunately, because like I've seen the posters on like Disneyland with like Buzz Lightyear, and I'm just like, why couldn't we just get this movie? The movie would have looked so better if it was more colorful, more fun, and if the little green men were actually in the movie. And don't even get me started on Zurg. Zurg was a huge letdown. When I first saw the movie, I was kind of blown away and was like, huh, I guess that's what we're doing here. But as I've seen more and more of the movie, they heavily waste his character, and he's actually without the suit more than he is in the suit, and his backstory feels very throwaway. It's a disappointment of the movie, and I think it's one of Pixar's biggest misfires they've ever done. It's the only movie from the Toy Story franchise I don't really love. Number 5 is Elio. Now, I have reviewed this movie, so you can see more of my thoughts there, but my thoughts here is I thought this was a very enjoyable and fun movie, but it was very clunky towards the very end. I talked about the production troubles a few days ago, and you can clearly tell that this movie was rushed. It felt like the creators didn't know what to do towards the end, and this movie doesn't even have an epilogue. It just ends abruptly, and you only get an epilogue in the post-credits. It's a very clunky in terms of the structure of the story, because all the conflicts are resolved way too easily, and the movie goes way too fast, and it feels like they're should have been a good 10 to 20 minutes. Heck, I would even argue that this movie probably should have been 2 hours long, just so that we could have fleshed out those characters a bit more, because by the end of the movie, what happens toward the end of the film, I didn't really feel an emotional connection towards the aliens at all, and Elio. They're cute characters and everything, but they're barely utilized, and they're kind of useless, so the audience doesn't really have an emotional connection to what happens at the end of the film. I think the movie really needed to be longer in order to be better, because if this movie was longer and had time to flesh out more of its ideas, I think this would have been another Pixar classic, but it remains a still great movie that needed some fixing. Now we get to the films that I absolutely love, and next up is Luca. Luca is a film that I thought was so cute and adorable, and the thing that I love about this film the most is that it's one of the most simple Pixar movies, but it's also one of their most entertaining. The fact this movie is only an hour and 36 minutes, which is actually shorter than Elio, and yet this movie doesn't feel rushed at all, and it feels like all its concepts and ideas were explored. I love that. I like that Pixar was doing something a lot more simpler with this film too. Sure, the story may not be Pixar's best, but I can excuse them for this when the heart is in the right place for this movie. This is an absolute Pixar classic for me. Number 3 is Onward. Onward was one that I think is criminally underrated because it released a week before the pandemic happened, and I remember seeing this for the first time and fell in love with it. My favorite part about this movie is the whole brother dynamic and how that ties into them seeing their father again, or at least Barley sees the father again. I love how all that ties into the end of the movie, and I love how this movie is personal to the director Dan Scanlon, which he said that he didn't grow up with a dad and that he grew up with his brother. Pixar movies that are very personal, like Luca and like Onward, are so great. And I love how the story unravels towards the third act of the movie, where Ian realizes that all the stuff that he wanted to do with his dad, that he ended up doing with his brother, and him realizing that he never had his dad, but he always had his brother, like that was very emotional, and I loved that. That's why I'll always be sad this movie is underrated, because I think if more people were able to see it, I think it would have done better at the box office, and I think the movie would have been remembered a lot more. I also think its fantasy concept of modernizing medieval fantasy is fantastic. I love how they seamlessly transition the old style of magic into what we have now with like light bulbs and stuff. And it's very creative world building for Pixar. So, not one of my favorite Pixar movies, but I do think it is one of their best films of the decade. Now, number 2 is Inside Out 2. I will never forget the hype that was for this movie when I used to talk about this movie constantly for days and days on end. It was such an event when this film was coming out. And the thing that I love the most about this movie is the message and the complex themes that it explores as we get older. The message that Joy says of like, maybe when we get older, we lose less joy, which was a very gut-punching moment in the movie. And the message of this film being that even with all your flaws and imperfections, that's what makes you who you are. This movie further is an exploration on who we are and makes us accept ourselves for who we are in the best way possible. A lot of people said this movie is like a therapy session, and really, it really is with all the complex themes it explores. It's not just the sequel just to make money, it's a necessary sequel that has helped a lot of people, and I cannot wait to see what else this franchise is going to offer in the near future. If they keep doing these complex stories, complex themes, and adding new emotions, and tackling new subjects, then please keep making these movies for as long as you can, because I love this franchise, and I want to see more of what they're going to do. But I think the biggest thing I love about this movie the most was anxiety. Her perception of Riley and what was best for her, but also what Joy was too. I thought anxiety's motive, while she wasn't a villain, I love that all the emotions and tensions are just to protect Riley, even if they don't do it in the best way. So yeah, I would consider Inside Out 2 one of Pixar's best sequels yet, and I think it's one of their most necessary and one of their most deep films they've done in a long time. But number 1 for me for Pixar films of this decade is Soul. Soul came out during a time in 2020, which was one of the worst years of my life. The pandemic kind of ruined everything, and I was so confused of what was happening at the time, because I was only 13 when this movie came out. So I was just so No, wait, 13? No, I was 12 when this movie came out, even younger. So when this movie was coming out, I was so excited to see it. And then when it got delayed, I'm like, oh. And then when I was like, yes, it's coming out in November. Oh, it's getting its theatrical release canceled. But when I finally saw the movie, this has to be one of Pixar's greatest efforts yet. And one that is criminally underrated because I am so sad the movie never got a true theatrical release. What I love about this film is the message of the meaning of life. It's not just the meaning of life or to follow your dreams. It's, yes, you can follow your dreams, but don't make that your only goal and purpose in life. Go live your life to the fullest. I loved that message. That's something I love about Pixar, is that they have one message, but they can twist it and turn it around and make it something greater than what you would normally expect. That's what Soul does so well, is all these complex themes that it explores about life, even about death, and it gives you a new perception on your life, which is something unheard of for an animated movie to do, let alone from Pixar, which is why I think this is one of their greatest films yet. Which is why I think Soul is the best Pixar film of this entire decade and might even be one of their greatest films ever created. So that's my ranking of all the Pixar films that have come out towards this decade. I actually think it's been a pretty good decade, but Pixar hasn't had the best track record recently. Even I can admit that. Someone that's loved Pixar for years, I hope that their future films like Hoppers, Toy Story 5, Godot, Incredibles 3, and more are as good as some of these other films that came out towards the beginning of this decade.